The phone call came on a Tuesday. The afternoon sun was streaming through my living room window, lighting up the little dust motes dancing in the air. I was sitting in my favourite armchair, the one with the worn, floral pattern, when my son, Mark, called from London. "So, Mother, we were just talking," he said. His voice had that smooth, careful tone he used when he was about to ask for something. "You must be so lonely in that big house, all by yourself." A cold little knot formed in my stomach. He and his sister never called to ask about my arthritis or my garden club. Their calls were like a doctor checking a pulse. They just wanted to make sure my heart was still beating and that the will was still in the drawer, unchanged. They weren't worried about my loneliness. They were worried about the square footage. After I hung up, the silence in the house felt different. It was heavier, like a thick wool blanket on a summer day. The old refrigerator hummed in the kitchen. A car drove by on the street outside, its tires making a soft shushing sound. I sat there for a long time, just listening to the quiet that my son called loneliness. I got up and walked to the big picture window that looked out onto my front lawn. Just then, my next-door neighbour, Sophia, pulled into her driveway. She got out of her car, her arms full of brown paper grocery bags. One had a big stalk of celery sticking out the top. She saw me standing in the window, and she smiled. It wasn't a big smile, just a little lift at the corners of her mouth. Then she gave me a small wave. It was such a simple thing. A wave. It cost her nothing. But after that phone call, it felt like she had handed me $1 million. The following Sunday, I walked next door to the Garcia's house. The smell of garlic and roasting chicken met me at the door. "Eleanor, come in, come in," Sophia said, wiping her hands on her apron. We sat around their small kitchen table. Her husband, Matteo, was there, and their son, Leo, was home from college for the weekend. "So, they're teaching me about economic theory," Leo said, rolling his eyes as he passed me the basket of warm rolls. "It's mostly just charts that prove rich people should get richer." Matteo laughed. "Leo, be nice." "How was your week, Eleanor?" Sophia asked. She didn't look at her phone while I answered. She just listened. I told her about the trouble I was having with my prize roses and how the church potluck casserole was a little dry. They listened like it was the most interesting news in the world. It felt more like family than a phone call from London ever did. The next week, my daughter Susan called from Dubai. It was a different continent, but the same conversation. The connection was tinny, with a slight delay that made everything feel even more distant. "I was just talking to Mark," she began. Of course she was. "Dad would have wanted you to be practical, Mom. We worry about the upkeep on the house. Practical. That was their favourite word. It meant sell the house, put the money somewhere safe, and wait. It was their code for protecting their inheritance. I just hummed a little non-committal sound into the receiver. "I actually found a wonderful financial planner for you," she went on, her voice getting brighter. "His name is Mr. Abernathy. He specializes in estate planning for seniors. I could have him give you a call." After I got off the phone with Susan, I went out into the garden. My late husband, David, had planted every single rose bush. I touched a petal on his favorite one, a deep red rose called Mr. Lincoln. The velvet was soft under my fingertips. I could almost hear his voice on the breeze. "This house isn't an investment, Eleanor," he told me once as we sat on the porch swing he built. "It's our life. We raised our children here. We celebrated birthdays and mourned losses within these walls. It was made of wood and nails, but it was held together by memories." A sharp pang of guilt went through me. I felt like I was failing him, letting our children turn his legacy into a line item on a spreadsheet. Then, the guilt was replaced by a slow, burning anger. They weren't just disrespecting me, they were disrespecting him too. A letter from the Homeowners Association arrived on a Tuesday. The envelope was stiff and important feeling. Inside, the words were cold. My fence paint was peeling. Section 4, paragraph B. I had 30 days to fix it. I sat at my kitchen table, the letter smelling faintly of ink and recycled paper, and looked out the window. The white paint was flaking off in little chips, showing the grey wood underneath. Hiring a painter felt like a mountain. On my fixed income, a few $100s for a paint job was a major expense. It meant cutting back on groceries or dipping into the little bit of savings I kept for real emergencies. I stared at the fence, my coffee growing cold in my mug, a familiar worry tightening in my chest. Later that afternoon, Mateo Garcia saw me from his yard. He was trimming his hedges. He gave me a small wave. "Everything okay, Eleanor?" He called over. I just held up the letter and sighed. "Oh, you know, the HOA." He nodded, a look of understanding on his face. The next morning, I heard a gentle scraping sound outside. I looked out, and there was Mateo, with a wire brush and a can of white paint. He hadn't even asked. He just saw a need and showed up. I mailed the birthday gift for my eldest grandchild, James, 2 weeks early. It was a beautiful leather-bound journal and a nice pen. I knew he loved to write. I also tucked a $50 bill inside the card. I spent a long time picking out the wrapping paper at the Hallmark store. At the post office, the clerk stamped the box with a heavy thud. "That'll get to London in about a week," he said. I waited. I imagined James opening it, the crinkle of the paper, maybe a quick call to say thank you. 2 weeks went by. My phone buzzed while I was washing dishes. I dried my hands and picked it up, my heart giving a little leap of hope. It was a text message from a number I didn't recognize at first. The message had 4 words. THEX for the Czech grandma. I stared at the bright little screen. He hadn't even mentioned the journal. The sting of it was sharp, a tiny paper cut on the heart. I set the phone down on the counter next to the soap suds and finished the dishes. My son, Mark, sent me an email the following Friday. The hum of my old desktop computer filled the quiet study. I clicked open my inbox, and his name was right at the top. The subject line read, "Some useful information." I opened it. There was no "Hello, Mom" or "How are you feeling?" Just a link. The title of the article was printed in bold blue letters. "Securing Your Legacy: How to Avoid Inheritance Tax." I didn't click the link. I didn't need to. The message was as clear as the church bells on Sunday morning. My life wasn't my life. It was a waiting period, a long, inconvenient holding pattern before their payout. My legacy wasn't the love I'd given or the memories I'd made. It was a house and a bank account that needed to be protected from taxes. My hand was steady on the mouse. I moved the cursor over the email, clicked the little trash can icon, and watched it disappear. I woke up on Wednesday feeling wrong. When I sat up in bed, the room tilted like a ship at sea. A wave of dizziness washed over me, cold and clammy. My blood pressure, I thought. It's my blood pressure again. I held on to the nightstand until the spinning stopped. My first instinct was to call my daughter. I dialed Susan's number in Dubai. The phone rang and rang, then clicked over to her cheerful, recorded voicemail. "Hi, you've reached Susan. Leave a message." I hung up. I called Mark in London. He didn't pick up at all. My hands were trembling now. I scrolled through my contacts and pressed the name Sofia Garcia. She answered on the second ring. "Eleanor, are you all right?" Sophia, dear, I said, my voice shaky. I'm feeling a little dizzy. I don't want to be a bother. I'll be right there, she said. Not 90 seconds later, I heard a gentle knock. It was Sophia, a nurse's uniform still on from her night shift, her medical kit in her hand. She sat me down in my armchair, the worn floral fabric soft against my back. As she wrapped the blood pressure cuff around my arm, my phone buzzed on the end table. It was a text from Susan. Sophia glanced at the screen. "You should get that," she said softly. I picked it up. The message read, "V busy. Can we talk wills next week?" I was feeling much better the next day, thanks to Sophia. She had made me some tea and stayed until she was sure I was steady on my feet. I was sitting on my porch swing, listening to its familiar, gentle creak, when I heard my phone ringing from the kitchen. By the time I shuffled inside, it had stopped. A missed call from Mark. A minute later, the phone showed a new voicemail. I pressed the button to listen, putting it on speaker. I expected to hear his voice. "Mum, just calling to check in." But there was only silence, then the muffled sound of him talking to someone else. His wife, I realized. He must have pocket-dialed me. "She's tough as an old boot," I heard Mark say, his voice tinny and distant. "She'll outlive us all. We just have to make sure she doesn't do anything stupid with the house before then." The air in my kitchen went cold. Stupid. The word hung there, sharp as a piece of broken glass. I stood perfectly still, my hand on the kitchen counter, and listened to the dial tone. All the little hurts, the thoughtless texts, the tax articles, they were just ripples. This was the stone hitting the water. This was the truth. The next morning, I woke before the sun. The house was still and quiet, but the silence felt different. It wasn't empty anymore. It was full of purpose. I made my coffee, the familiar gurgle of the machine a comforting sound. I didn't turn on the television. I didn't want the noise. I carried my mug to the small desk in the corner of the living room and opened my laptop. The little blue light blinked on. The search bar pulsed, waiting. My hands didn't tremble as I typed the words. Top-rated estate lawyers in my area. The time for feeling hurt was over. Now it was time for doing. 2 days later, I was sitting in a leather chair that smelled faintly of polish and old paper. The office belonged to a Ms. Albright. She was a woman about my daughter's age, with sharp eyes and hair pulled back so tight it looked like it hurt. She didn't offer me weak tea or tissues. She offered me a glass of water and her full attention. I told her everything. The phone calls that were only about money. The grandchildren who texted their thanks for a check. I told her about the Garcias, about the fence, about Sophia checking my blood pressure, and then I told her about the pocket dial. He said they just have to make sure I don't do anything stupid with the house. I repeated, my voice flat. Ms. Albright wrote something on a yellow legal pad. She didn't look up. "I see," she said. It was all she said, but in those 2 words, I felt more understood than I had in 10 years. For the first time, I felt like someone was on my side. Ms. Albright gave me a list of things to gather. For the next week, my house became a treasure hunt. I found the deed to the house in the old metal box in David's closet. The paper was thin, folded into a perfect square. I pulled out my social security statements and David's pension information from a file cabinet. The drawers squeaked with rust. Each document was a piece of my life, a life of hard work, of careful saving, of love and partnership. My children saw these papers as numbers on a spreadsheet. They saw a future payout. My life was not a waiting room for their inheritance. I said it out loud to the empty room, and the words echoed in the quiet air. My daughter Susan called on Thursday. Her voice was sweet as syrup. "Hi, Mum. Just calling to see how you are." I decided it was time for a small test. I let the silence hang for a moment before I answered. "I'm fine, dear," I said, my voice calm. "Actually, I've been thinking. I'm thinking of selling the house and moving into a small condo. It's just too much for me." Her voice tightened so fast it was like a string snapping. "Mum, don't be rash. What are you talking about? That house is our biggest family asset. You can't just throw away Dad's legacy." There it was. Not, "Are you okay, Mom?" Not, "What can we do to help?" Just the asset. The legacy. "Let me call Mark," she said, her voice sharp and businesslike. "We need to talk about this." After I hung up, I found the old photo album on the bottom shelf of the bookcase. The plastic pages were yellowed and crackled at the edges. I turned to a picture of me, young and round with my first pregnancy. I was standing in the unfinished frame of this very house. David was beside me, smiling, with sawdust in his hair. He was working 2 jobs back then, so we could afford the down payment. We ate casserole 3 nights a week and dreamed of the children who would fill these rooms with laughter. I looked at that young woman in the photograph, full of hope. I hadn't given them just a house. I had given them everything. And I realized, with a quiet and certain clarity, that I had given them enough. I invited the Garcias over for tea on a Tuesday afternoon. I used the good china, the ones with the little blue flowers that David had bought me for our 10th anniversary. My hands trembled just a little as I poured the hot water over the tea bags. The steam smelled of Earl Grey and determination. Sophia and Matteo sat on my sofa, looking a little confused. "Is everything all right, Eleanor?" Sophia asked, her voice soft. I took a deep breath. "I have a proposal for you," I said. I explained my idea. I wanted to give them my house, legally and completely. I only asked that I could live here until I passed on. I watched their faces as I spoke. Sophia's eyes filled with tears. Matteo just stared, his mouth slightly open, completely speechless. "Eleanor, we can't accept this," Matteo finally managed to say. "It's too much. We only helped with the fence." I looked him straight in the eye. "You helped with more than the fence. You gave me your time. You shared your family. My own children feel they are owed this house. I feel it should go to those who have earned my gratitude." I picked up my teacup. "I've spent my life giving them enough. It's time I gave myself peace." Sophia was openly crying now, her hand covering her mouth. Matteo looked down at his hands, humbled and overwhelmed. The silence in the room wasn't awkward. It was heavy with emotion, and I knew I had done the right thing. The next day, I was back in Miss Albright's office. The room smelled of old books and lemon polish. She had a stack of papers on her big, dark wood desk. The air conditioner hummed softly in the corner. "This is the legal instrument we'll use," she said, tapping the top page. "It's called a gift deed, with a retained life estate." She explained it in simple terms. The house would be legally theirs, right away. But the life estate part meant I had the absolute right to live here, undisturbed, for the rest of my days. "It transfers ownership now," she said, her voice clear and firm. "That makes it nearly impossible for your children to contest it later by claiming you weren't of sound mind. Once the deed is recorded, it's done." I felt a wave of relief so strong I could have floated right out of my chair. It wasn't a complicated, angry plan. It was simple, clean, and final. "It is quiet, it is legal, and it is final," she said, as if reading my mind. It was perfect. The only question left was when to sign. A few days later, Mark called. It was his usual quarterly check-in, the one that always felt more like an audit. I was in the kitchen, watching a blue jay peck at the bird feeder, and I let it ring 3 times before answering. "Hi, Mum. Just calling to see how you are," he said. The connection was a little fuzzy, like he was calling from his car in London. "I'm fine, Mark. How are you?" I kept my voice light and calm. The usual knot of anxiety I felt during these calls was completely gone. I just felt quiet. I answered his questions about my health and the weather with short, simple sentences. He paused on the other end of the line. I could hear the faint sound of traffic behind him. "Mum, are you all right?" he asked, a strange note in his voice. "You sound different." I smiled to myself. "I've never been better, dear," I said, and before he could ask another question, I added, "I have to go. Something's on the stove. Talk to you later." And I ended the call. The following week, I was back in Ms. Albright's office. The papers were all laid out on the polished desk. The pen she gave me was heavy and cool in my hand. The only sound in the room was the gentle ticking of a grandfather clock in the corner. "Are you ready, Eleanor?" Ms. Albright asked gently. I looked at the line where my name was supposed to go. I thought of David and the life we built in that house. I thought of Mark and Susan and the life they expected to inherit from it. Then I thought of Sophia's kindness and Matteo's quiet help and the sound of their family's laughter carrying over the fence on a summer evening. My hand was steady as I signed my name. The ink was a dark, decisive blue. It didn't feel like I was giving something away. It felt like I was taking my life back. When I got home, I felt a strange energy, like I'd tidied up a room that had been messy for 30 years. I sat down at my little desk in the den, the one where I paid my bills. The old computer hummed to life, its screen glowing in the dim room. There was one more piece of the puzzle. I opened my web browser and logged into my life insurance portal. It was a modest policy, just enough for final expenses and a little left over. For decades, the primary beneficiaries had been listed as Mark and Susan, split 50-50. With a few clicks of the mouse, I found the page to edit beneficiary information. I typed in the new details, creating a small trust for the Garcia family to be managed by a neutral third party. It was a smaller step than signing away the house, but it felt just as significant. I was cutting the last financial string. After I clicked confirm, I closed the laptop and the room went dark. But I felt lighter than I had in years. My nosy HOA president, Carol, stopped me during my morning walk. Her visor was pulled down low, and she was holding a pair of pruning shears like a weapon. "I see the Garcias are over at your place all the time," she said, her voice a little too sweet. "Everything okay, Eleanor?" I stopped and faced her, feeling the warm sun on my back. I could smell the freshly cut grass from the lawn next to us. "Everything is wonderful, Carol," I said, giving her a warm smile. "It's a blessing to have such caring neighbours." I paused for just a moment, then added the final stone to the wall I was building. "Their family?" The word hung in the air between us, heavy and solid. Carol's smile flickered. She had no idea what to do with that information. A few days later, a courier in a crisp uniform delivered a large, stiff envelope. I signed for it on his electronic pad and carried it inside, my heart beating a steady, calm rhythm. The air conditioner hummed quietly in the background. I sat at my kitchen table and carefully opened the seal. Inside were the final, notarized documents. Ms. Albright's paralegal would file them with the county recorder's office tomorrow morning. I pulled out the gift deed. I ran my fingers over the paper, my name listed only as the grantor. It no longer had my name as the owner. I felt a surge of pure, unadulterated freedom, so light it almost made me dizzy. It was done. All that was left was to wait for the official word. The next afternoon, Ms. Albright called. Her voice was professional, but I could hear the satisfaction in it. "It's done, Eleanor," she said. "The transfer is officially recorded. The house is theirs." "Thank you," I said softly. After we hung up, I sat in my armchair and looked around my living room. The same floral sofa, the same bookcase filled with David's old history books, the same faint scent of lemon polish. It was the same room, but everything felt different. It was my home by right of love and care, not by a piece of paper. I felt as light as the dust motes dancing in the afternoon sun. That evening, I sat at the little desk in the corner of my bedroom. I opened my laptop and drafted a short, simple email. The clicking of the keys was the only sound in the quiet house. I addressed it to both Mark and Susan. The subject line was just 2 words: some personal news. The body was just as simple. "Dear children," I wrote, "I wanted to let you know I have made some legal arrangements to simplify my estate. The house has been gifted to the Garcia family for their incredible kindness to me. This gives me great peace of mind. Love, Mom." My finger hovered over the mouse for only a second. I pressed send. Then I reached for my phone, held down the power button, and watched the screen go black. The next morning, I made my coffee and sat by the window for a long time before I dared to turn my phone back on. When I did, it buzzed and chirped like an angry insect. 17 missed calls from Mark, 8 from Susan, dozens of texts. I let the next call ring, the sound shrill in the quiet kitchen. Then I answered it and pressed the speaker button, placing the phone on the granite countertop. Mark's voice, distorted with rage, filled the room. "How could you?" he screamed. No greeting, no preamble. "After everything we've done for you. That's our house, Dad's house." I said nothing. I just sipped my coffee. His voice got louder, uglier. "I'll get this reversed, I swear to God. I'll talk to a lawyer. I'll have you declared incompetent." I pressed the red button on my phone, right in the middle of his shouting. The silence that followed was a wonderful, heavy thing, like a thick blanket. I walked into the kitchen, the linoleum cool on my feet, and put the kettle on for a cup of chamomile tea. The little blue flame hissed to life under the pot. My phone buzzed again on the counter, a frantic, angry vibration. It was Mark. I picked it up, pressed the button on the side to silence it, and set it face down. Through the window over the sink, I watched a little brown sparrow peck at the bird feeder David had built. The contrast was so sharp, it almost made me laugh. His screaming across an ocean, and my quiet kitchen. It was the first real victory I'd felt in years. The kettle began to whistle, a long, steady note that filled the room. An hour later, my phone rang again. A different number. I knew it was Susan calling from Dubai. Her approach was always different from Mark's. She didn't start with rage. She started with tears. I could hear her sniffling before she even said my name. "Mom," she sobbed, "I just don't understand. How could you do this to us? Don't you love us?" I held the phone a few inches from my ear, listening to the performance. The words that would have broken my heart a year ago now sounded hollow, like lines from a play she had rehearsed. "Are those people," she choked out, "more important than your own grandchildren?" I looked at a photo on my fridge, one of her 2 children squinting in the bright desert sun. "I love my grandchildren very much, Susan," I said, my voice even and calm. The manipulation was so clear now, like looking through a freshly cleaned window. I waited for their fury to cool down for another day. Then, I picked up my phone and composed a single text message. I sent it to both Mark and Susan in a group chat. It was very short. My decision is final and was made in sound mind. It is not up for discussion. My thumb hovered over the screen for a moment. Then I went into my contacts and blocked both of their numbers. A little pop-up asked if I was sure. I was. I set the block for 24 hours. The silence that followed felt earned. It felt like clean air after a storm. The house was so quiet. All I could hear was the gentle hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. For the first time, it didn't feel like a lonely sound. It felt like peace. The next day, after the block expired, an email arrived. The subject line was urgent regarding Mom's welfare. It was from both of them. I opened it while my morning coffee brewed, its rich smell filling the kitchen. The email was full of words like unconscionable and highly irregular. They questioned my mental state. They accused the Garcias of undue influence, a term their lawyer must have given them. It was a long, ugly letter, spitting threats and accusations onto the page. I scrolled to the bottom, my heart beating a slow, steady rhythm. The final line read, "We are arranging for Adult Protective Services to pay you a visit to ensure your welfare." The doorbell rang 2 days later. I had been expecting it. I smoothed my apron and opened the door to a uniformed police officer and a kind-faced woman in a neat blazer. She held up an ID. "Ma'am, my name is Linda. I'm with Adult Protective Services. May we come in for a moment?" "Of course," I said, stepping aside. "I just put on a pot of coffee. Would you like a cup?" I invited them into my clean living room. I calmly answered all their questions. I showed them my tidy home, my full pantry, and my calendar on the wall, which was filled with my book club meetings, church potlucks, and pottery classes. The officer mostly stood by the door, looking a little embarrassed. Linda, the social worker, looked around at the photos on the mantel, the healthy plants in the window, and the warm Afghan folded over my favourite chair. She turned back to me, and her professional expression softened into a genuine smile. "Ma'am," she said, closing her notepad, "it seems to me you're doing just fine." I took a picture of my children's email with my phone. The part about Adult Protective Services was underlined in my mind. I forwarded it to Ms. Albright with a simple message. "This is what I received this morning." An hour later, my phone rang. The screen said, "Albright Law." "Eleanor," she said, her voice crisp as a new dollar bill. "I have reviewed the email. This is textbook elder intimidation. I am sending a formal cease and desist letter to both of their addresses, foreign and domestic." "What does that mean exactly?" I asked, twisting the phone cord around my finger. "It means," she said, and I could hear the satisfaction in her voice, "that they have been legally warned. Any further contact of this nature, any more threats, and we will file for a restraining order." She paused. "Checkmate, Eleanor." The word hung in the air after we hung up. It wasn't a word I used. It was a word for a game. But she was right. It felt like the last piece had been moved, and the board was finally still. That evening, my doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I saw Sophia and Matteo standing on my porch. Matteo was holding a casserole dish wrapped in a red and white tea towel. I opened the door. "We heard about the police car," Sophia said softly. Her eyes were full of concern, not curiosity. "We just wanted to make sure you were all right." "I'm fine, dear. It was just a misunderstanding." I didn't need to give them the ugly details. "Still," Matteo said, holding out the dish. "My mother's chicken and rice." Good for misunderstandings. I took the warm, heavy dish into my hands. They didn't ask to come in. They didn't press for gossip. They just stood there, offering food and quiet support. We stood in the doorway for a moment, the scent of baked chicken mingling with the evening air. The war was over. The quiet had begun. A month passed in blissful silence. At first, the quiet felt strange, like a missing tooth you keep poking with your tongue. I'd jump every time the phone rang, but it was never them. It was my friend Martha from church, or the pharmacy with a prescription reminder. The constant, low hum of anxiety that had lived in my chest for years simply faded away. I started sleeping through the night. I'd wake up in the morning, and the first thing I'd feel wasn't dread, but the soft weight of my quilt. The absence of their toxic energy was like a physical weight had been lifted from my shoulders. It was astonishing how much space their drama had taken up in my head, and now it was all just empty, ready for something new. Leo Garcia came home from college for the summer. I saw him from my kitchen window, admiring the big, deep red roses that grew along my fence. They had been my husband, David's pride and joy. I went outside. They're called Mr. Lincoln, I told him. They're amazing, Mrs. Evans, he said, his smile genuine. How do you get them to bloom like that? I spent the next afternoon teaching him. I showed him how to find the 5-leaflet stems, how to make the cut at an angle, how to clear away the dead leaves from the base. My hands, covered in dirt, felt useful. I was passing on a love for something real, something that grew, not just a deed to a house. My hands were dirty with soil, and my heart was full. At my weekly coffee morning in the church basement, the air thick with the smell of brewing coffee and powdered donuts, Martha pulled me aside. Her face was pinched with concern. "Eleanor, dear," she whispered, glancing around. "I heard the most bizarre rumor about your house." I didn't flinch. I looked her straight in the eye and gave her the simple truth. "It's no rumor, Martha. I gave it to the people who have shown me the most kindness." She blinked, processing this. I expected a lecture, or at least a gasp. Instead, she put her warm, papery hand over mine. "Good for you," she said, her voice firm. "It's about time someone did what was right for them, not just for their children." Her approval felt like a warm blanket. A handwritten letter arrived, postmarked from Dubai. The envelope was thin as an onion skin, covered in stamps I didn't recognize. I knew Susan's looping, dramatic handwriting instantly. I made myself a cup of tea before I opened it, letting the steam warm my hands. The letter was long. It rambled on about her busy life, the stress of her job, the children's demanding schedules. Then came the part I was waiting for. "I'm sorry if my concern for your finances came across the wrong way," she wrote. "I was only thinking of what Dad would have wanted for your security." It wasn't an apology for her greed. It was an apology for getting caught. I read the words again, feeling nothing. No anger, no pain. Just a quiet emptiness where my love for her used to be. I folded the thin paper, walked into the kitchen, and dropped it into the blue recycling bin next to the empty milk jug. It made no sound at all as it landed. The next morning, I heard the metallic scrape of a ladder against the side of the house. I looked out the kitchen window and saw Matteo, Sophia's husband, climbing up toward the roofline. I put on my slippers and went out onto the porch. The air was cool and smelled of damp earth. "Matteo, what on earth are you doing?" I called up to him. He looked down, a screwdriver tucked behind his ear. "Just fixing this loose gutter, Eleanor. Noticed it last week. We're supposed to get rain this weekend." "Oh, you shouldn't have," I said. "Let me pay you for your time." He just shook his head and smiled. Don't be silly. This is what neighbors do. I watched him work for a few minutes, his hands sure and steady. This is what care looked like. It wasn't a phone call about estate taxes. It was a man on a ladder, fixing a loose gutter before a storm. That afternoon, I found the community centre brochure I'd tucked away in a drawer weeks ago. There was a little circle drawn around the Introduction to Pottery class on Tuesday mornings. For years, I told myself I couldn't afford it, that I should be saving that money for a rainy day or for the grandkids. I picked up the phone and dialed the number. My voice was steady when I gave the woman my name. Yes, she said, her voice cheerful. The Tuesday morning class still has one spot left. I'll take it, I said, pulling my credit card from my wallet. The plastic felt cool and solid in my hand. I read her the numbers without a second thought. It was my pension, my money. I didn't have to justify it or save it for anyone. The freedom of it was a small, intoxicating thrill. After I hung up, I sat in the quiet kitchen, listening to the hum of the refrigerator, and wondered what else I had been waiting for permission to do. The doorbell rang on Friday. It was a delivery man with a square, flat box. The return address was in London. I took it inside and set it on the dining room table. My hands were steady as I cut the tape and lifted the lid. Inside, nestled in white tissue paper, was a heavy, silver-plated picture frame. It held a professionally taken photograph of Mark, his wife, and their 2 children. They were all wearing matching cream-colored sweaters, smiling perfect, toothy smiles. Tucked into the corner of the frame was a small folded card. I opened it. The note, in Mark's sharp, impatient script, said only, "Family is forever." The manipulation was so obvious, so clumsy, I almost laughed. Did he really think a 5-word guilt trip in a $50 frame could undo years of neglect? I held the photo in my hands, the weight of it feeling false and heavy. I walked out of the dining room, past the mantel where the smiling picture of my David sat. I passed the main bookshelf in the living room, filled with books I'd read and loved. I didn't stop until I reached the spare bedroom at the end of the hall. The air in there was still and cool. I walked over to the tall bookshelf against the wall, the one filled with old paperbacks and my high school yearbooks. I reached up and placed the silver frame on the very top shelf, behind a stack of dusty novels. I didn't hide it, but I didn't display it either. It was simply put away. They had been given their proper place in my life, in the past and in the background. I closed the bedroom door, leaving them in the quiet dark, and the whole house suddenly felt lighter. My nosy HOA president, Carol, stopped me during my morning walk. Her hair was a perfect helmet of silver hairspray. The smell of it always tickled my nose. "I see Mateo Garcia's work truck is parked on the street again, Eleanor," she said, her voice dripping with false concern. "You know the rules about commercial vehicles." A few days later, a crisp white envelope from the HOA was stuck in my door. A fine. I showed it to Sophia that evening. She just nodded, her lips a thin, determined line. At the next HOA meeting, held in the chilly community clubhouse that smelled of stale coffee, Sophia stood up. She spoke calmly. Mr. Garcia's truck was parked on the street because he was performing pro bono repairs for an elderly neighbor on a fixed income, she said, looking right at Carol. He was fixing a gutter to prevent water damage to her foundation. The board members looked at each other. The fine was dropped. Driving home, I realized something new. It wasn't just me protecting myself anymore. My new family, my community, was protecting me too. The house was quiet, but it was a different kind of quiet now. It wasn't the lonely, waiting silence I had grown used to. It was a peaceful silence. Still, Sometimes it felt a little too big, a little too empty. I think I want a dog, I told Sophia over a cup of tea. That's a wonderful idea, Eleanor, she said, her eyes lighting up. The following Saturday, Matteo drove us to the county animal shelter. The air inside smelled of bleach and dog biscuits. 100 barks echoed off the concrete walls. And in a small pen in the corner was a little scruffy terrier mix with one floppy ear. He wasn't barking. He just sat there, watching me with wise brown eyes. I came home with a dog named Pip, who immediately curled up into a warm, breathing ball at my feet. The silence in the house was finally filled. Thanksgiving was just around the corner. I saw a pyramid of pumpkins at the entrance to the grocery store, and a shiver went through me. Not of cold, but of memory. Last year I had spent the day alone. I'd made a small Cornish hen for myself and waited by the phone. A text message from Susan arrived around 9 o'clock that night. It said, "Happy Tea Day." That was it. This year, I felt no dread. I walked down the baking aisle and picked up a can of Libby's pumpkin and a bag of pecans. I thought about the table, filled with people. I thought about the sound of real laughter echoing in the dining room. For the first time in a decade, I was looking forward to the holiday. A letter arrived from London. The envelope was heavy, cream-coloured paper, the kind lawyers use to make you feel small. It was from a firm representing my son, Mark. I held it in my hand, feeling its weight. In the past, my heart would have been pounding in my chest. My hands would have shaken. This time I just sighed. I was tired of their games. I didn't even get a letter opener. I walked back to my desk, took out a fresh manila envelope, and wrote Ms. Albright's address on the front. I slipped Mark's unopened letter inside, sealed it, and put a stamp in the corner. It felt good to send his drama somewhere else, to a place where it would be handled without touching my peace. My phone rang 2 days later. The caller ID said Albright and Associates. "Eleanor, it's Catherine Albright," she said. Her voice was crisp and full of satisfaction. "I received the letter from your son's legal counsel." I waited, holding my breath just a little. And they have nothing," she said, and I could hear the smile in her voice. "It was a fishing expedition, full of veiled questions about your health and finances. I sent a reply that made it very clear that any further contact would be considered harassment of a senior citizen." There was a pause. "I don't think you'll be hearing from them again, Eleanor." I closed my eyes and let out a long, slow breath. The war was over. I had won. I hosted Thanksgiving at my house. The table in the dining room, the one David and I bought 50 years ago, was full for the first time in a decade. The whole house smelled of roasting turkey and my sweet potato pie. The low hum of the oven was drowned out by real, honest laughter. The Garcias were there, of course. Leo was home from college and telling a story about his chemistry professor that had Matteo wiping tears from his eyes. I'd invited Martha from my church group and another widow from down the street, Helen, whose children lived too far to visit. "Eleanor, this is the best stuffing I have ever tasted," Martha said, holding up her fork. Sophia was already on her feet. "Do you need any help in the kitchen?" she asked, her voice soft. "Not a bit, dear," I said, looking around the table at the smiling faces. "Everything is just perfect." I thought about last year, when I ate a frozen dinner alone and waited for a phone call that never came. I looked at the happy, noisy group around my table, my new family, and I knew David would have loved this. This was the life he wanted for me. This was what a home was for. A single email from Mark got through my spam filter a few days later. I saw his name in my inbox, and my stomach did a familiar little flip. but it was weaker this time, like a distant echo. I clicked on it. The tone was completely different from his last screaming phone call. There was no rage, no threats. There was desperation. He wrote about a bad investment in some tech company. He said the market had turned, and he'd lost a significant amount of money. He'd been counting on the house, he wrote. It was his financial safety net. Mum, I know things are bad between us. The email ended. But I am in serious trouble. I am asking for your help. For the first time in his adult life, he wasn't demanding. He was pleading. I read the words safety net and felt a chill. I was never a mother to him, just a backup plan. I closed the laptop. The quiet of my living room felt heavy with his request. I thought about his email for a long time. I made a pot of tea and sat in my favourite armchair, watching the finches at the bird feeder. I remembered his voice from that accidental phone call, telling his wife I was tough as an old boot. I remembered him saying they just had to make sure I didn't do anything stupid with the house. He was right about one thing. I was tough, and I was done doing stupid things, like funding the life of a grown man who saw me as an obstacle to his inheritance. I opened my laptop again. The cursor blinked on the screen, waiting. I typed one single sentence. I am sorry to hear of your troubles, and I wish you the best. I pressed send. There was no anger, no satisfaction, just a quiet, final click. I was not his safety net anymore. I was not a bank. I was a person, and my life was my own. A few evenings later, Sophia and I spent the evening looking through my old photo albums. The room was warm, lit by a single lamp, and the pages smelled faintly of paper and time. Pip, my little terrier, was curled up at my feet. I pointed to a black and white photo of a very young man with a proud grin, holding a tiny baby. This was David, the day we brought Mark home from the hospital, I said. My voice was steady. He was so proud. He worked 2 jobs so I could stay home with the children. He looks so happy, Sophia said, her finger tracing the edge of the photograph. She pointed to another picture, of me in a sundress, laughing. I couldn't have been more than 20. You look so full of life. You've always been a fighter, haven't you, Eleanor? Her words surprised me. I'd never thought of myself as a fighter, a wife, a mother, a widow. But she was right. I had been fighting all along, fighting to be seen, fighting to be heard. And I had finally won. The phone rang one afternoon, a number I didn't recognize. I almost let it go, but something made me answer. The voice on the other end was crackly and familiar. It was my cousin Jean, from Ohio. We hadn't spoken in years. Eleanor? It's John, she said. Listen, I heard what happened. The story is making its way through the family grapevine. I braced myself for a lecture. I expected her to tell me I was being cruel, that family is family no matter what. Instead, she said, Eleanor, I'm proud of you. I had to sit down. You did what none of us had the courage to do. You have no idea how many of us feel, just like you did. We talked for almost an hour. She told me about her own son, who only called when he needed money for his failing business. It was like listening to my own story, just with different names. When we finally hung up, I felt a powerful sense of relief. I wasn't alone. I wasn't a monster. I was just the first one who had finally said, enough. I met with Ms. Albright one last time. Her office smelled of strong coffee and old books, a comforting scent. I sat in the leather chair that had once felt so intimidating, but now felt like an old friend. This is the last piece of it, I said, sliding a handwritten list across her polished desk. My personal things. She put on her reading glasses. Your wedding ring to Sophia, she read aloud. Your husband's watch to Matteo, and a small piece of jewelry for each grandchild. She looked up at me over the rims of her glasses. Just a small piece. A memory is enough, I told her. My love was never the problem. She nodded slowly, then continued down the list. And the remainder of your savings for Leo's education. An investment in a kind heart, I said, is never a bad one. A small smile touched her lips as she made a note on a legal pad. The scratching of her pen was the only sound. I'm sitting on my porch swing with Pip in my lap. His little body is a warm weight against my legs, and his soft snores mix with the gentle creak of the swing's chains. The fence Matteo painted is a clean, bright white in the afternoon sun. The roses Leo helped me prune are bursting with deep red blooms, their petals like velvet. A neighbour, Mrs. Henderson, walked by with her mail. Your garden looks lovelier than ever, Eleanor, she called out. I smiled and stroked Pip's head. It's had a lot of love put into it this year, I answered. She waved and continued on her way. I watched a fat bumblebee drone from one rose to another. I felt a deep, unshakable contentment, a quiet joy that felt like it had settled right into my bones. For the first time, I wasn't waiting for a phone call or worrying about the next one. I was just living. It was a warm Sunday evening. The air was thick with the smell of cut grass and approaching night. I was about to walk next door for our usual dinner when I saw Sophia coming up my walkway. She was carefully balancing a plate covered with a clean dish towel. Mama insisted you have these, she said, her voice soft. She said you looked like you could use a quiet night at home. She handed me the plate. The warmth seeped through the towel into my hands. It was her mother's famous tamales. She's a very wise woman, I said. We sat together on the top step of my porch, eating in comfortable silence as the sun bled orange and purple across the sky. The first crickets of the evening began their chirping. No words were needed. We just shared the food and the quiet, and it was more than enough. From my porch, I could see the park across the street. A young family was there, a mother and father chasing two small toddlers through the grass. Their squeals of laughter carried on the evening breeze. It triggered a memory so sharp it almost made me catch my breath. Mark and Susan, their hair wet and plastered to their heads, running through the sprinkler in this very yard, their small bodies shrieking with joy. A brief, fleeting sadness washed over me, a ghost of a feeling for what was lost. Pip nudged my hand with his wet nose, as if he could sense it. I stroked his scruffy fur. That was a long time ago, wasn't it, boy? I whispered. The sadness passed as quickly as it came. It left behind not bitterness, but a profound sense of peace for what I had found in its place. There was no regret. I was in my garden at dusk, watering my roses. The metal of the old watering can was cool against my skin. The air smelled of damp earth and the sweet jasmine climbing the trellis. Next door, I could hear the soft murmur of the Garcia family talking on their patio, the sound as comforting as a familiar hymn. I looked back at my house. The windows were beginning to glow with warm light against the deep blue of the twilight. It stood there, solid and safe. It was no longer a possession to be fought over, an asset to be liquidated. It was a home, filled with care, and I was finally, truly, at peace within it.